I remember it like it was yesterday. It was August 2nd, 2002, and my then boyfriend at the time, we'll call him James, and I were coming back from visiting his parents for the weekend. And in typical fashion, we stopped off at an antique store or a junk store that they had in every town in Kentucky. This one happened to be called Barnacle's Antiques and Collectibles. I don't know if the name has changed, but it was right outside of Bowling Green, right off the parkway. We weren't really looking for anything in particular, just sort of browsing. And there was this room in the back filled with old kids' toys. Big guttural screams. Naturally, I was freaked out. I told James about it, but he just laughed and said it was probably just some big rats in the attic. I went into the living room and I flipped on all the lights. Everything was fine. I didn't hear or see anything else after that, so I chalked it up to a weird dream and went back to bed. He also pointed out that our living room was pretty much empty at the time, just a couch, a TV, an end table, and a bookcase. But then it happened again, and this time I woke up and the doll was sitting on the couch. And he said, "No, you did. I saw you. You came home last night." Went straight into the living room, but I was pretty sure that I remembered everything I did the day before. So I went into the living room again, and I picked the damn doll up and took it back into my bedroom and put it under my bed. I distinctly remembered coming home, taking the doll out of the living room and putting her back on the shelf, and then going straight to bed. We didn't want to tempt fate, so we wrapped it up and we took it back to the antique store the next weekend. "Oh yeah, that's that doll." And we said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "People say that if you take that doll home with you, she won't leave. She'll follow you everywhere." And he said, "Well, it's kind of known around town that this place is haunted, and we ended up leaving the doll there and we never went back." And he said, "Yeah, like she lived with you and she won't leave you alone. But now, every time I pass by that antique store, I look at it sideways because who knows? Maybe she's waiting for someone new to follow her home. Some people have even gone crazy trying to get away from her. She's bad news, that doll. I wouldn't mess with her. And people say that sometimes things move around on their own, especially that doll. Some teenagers even tried stealing it a couple months ago to use in a movie or something like that. But I heard they brought it home and they couldn't keep it because it was just moving around everywhere and they started getting really freaked out. So they brought it back and then came back out and went straight to bed. I was watching TV and I saw you. Not exactly sure how a rat was gonna sound like a freight train running over a bridge. And I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "What the hell? How did you get back here?" And I said, "What do you mean? Where did I come from?" But then the guy said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "Yeah, some people say that doll is possessed by the spirit of a little girl who used to play here when this was an actual antique store and not just a junk shop. Supposedly she died young, and now she likes to hang around here." And he said, "No, the doll. You put the doll on the bookshelf this morning, and now she's back on the couch." And it was one of those hot summer days where you read driving around with the AC blasting, and you walk into a building like that, and it's stuffy and stale. So we didn't spend much time in there. But I do remember seeing this little girl's doll in a Victorian nightgown sitting on a shelf, and she was pretty creepy. So I picked the doll up and walked her into the living room and placed her back down on the bookcase. At this point, I was getting annoyed more than anything because I was pretty sure that whatever was making those noises in the middle of the night was my imagination. There was no way some creepy doll was gonna scare me. She had black yarn hair and a wax canvas face. And when I say her face was creepy, I mean that her eyes were blank and soulless. The kind of thing that would make you wonder if she'd ever blink. James and I looked at each other and we both said, "Ew." And we kept walking. We weren't really into dolls and we didn't want to start collecting them, so we didn't buy her. like something horrible had happened or was going to happen. I tried to shake it off and went back to sleep, but then I started hearing strange sounds in what I assumed was my living room. I couldn't quite make out what they were, but they definitely sounded like footsteps. And I'm talking heavy footsteps, like someone walking around in steel toe boots. And that was that. Or so I thought until about 4 meets. But these sounds were different. They were distinct and they were deliberate. And this went on for several nights. It was always the same, waking up in the middle of the night and hearing what sounded like heavy footsteps in the living room. It must have been about 2 hours after we got home when I was awoken in my bed by what I could only describe as the feeling of dread. Now, I live in an older house and it does creak and moan sometimes, especially when it rains. Then one night I woke up to those same sounds, followed by what sounded like screams in the living room. But then one night it happened again, and I actually got up to go see what was going on. The next morning I told James what had happened, and he finally agreed that maybe it wasn't rats. But he still didn't seem too concerned. Now I'm not a huge fan of dolls, but I'm not scared of them either, so I just decided to ignore it. But then I came home from work one day and James was standing in the living room with his mouth open staring at the couch, and I said, "I did not. I haven't touched that doll since I put her back on the bookshelf yesterday afternoon." I thought, shit, maybe I did do that. Maybe this is just some weird repressed memory thing. So I guess I could have done it and just blocked it out, but I don't know. Something told me that I hadn't. After that, James and I talked about it a lot, and we decided that it was best to just get rid of it. When we told the guy behind the counter about what happened, he kind of just rolled his eyes and said, and I thought, okay, so maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe this is just some harmless ghost or something. And then he leaned in real close. And we said, what? So, like, she's gonna follow us home? And we were like, okay, cool. Thank you for warning us. And that was that. No more creepy doll, no more footsteps, no more screams in the middle of the night.